Today, we have the pleasure to examine doctoral student Manoj Bhusal's doctoral dissertation, which is entitled Mediation, Meddling, and Micromanagement, India in Nepal's Peace Process and Political Transition. And we are honored to have, as an honored opponent, Professor Francesco Strazzari from Sant'Anna Scuola Universitaria Universitas de Pisa.
Yes.
Yes. As the custos appointed by the Faculty of Social Science, I declare this examination open.
Honored custos, honored opponent, faculty representatives, dear colleagues, family, friends, and members of the audience. I stand before you today not merely to present an academic thesis, but to tell a story of a small nation in the Himalayas, a tale of geopolitical struggle and survival, a story of peace hard-won and justice yet unfinished. This is the story of my homeland, Nepal, and its journey from the shadows of war into a prolonged and turbulent political transition. Today, I have the privilege of standing before you to introduce the work that has occupied me for many years, my doctoral research on India's role in Nepal's peace process and political transition, which began in 2005 and lasted until 2017. For me, this research is not only an academic journey, but also a deeply personal one. I come from Nepal, a country that in the span of just over a decade witnessed extraordinary upheavals. The end of a 240-year-old monarchy, the resolution of a brutal armed conflict, the drafting of a new constitution, and the birth of a secular democratic republic. For any nation, such transformations would be remarkable. For a small and fragile country like Nepal, they were nothing short of historic. And yet, this transition was not purely a Nepali story. It was also shaped sometimes gently, sometimes assertively by the actions of India. To understand my research, let's go back to the early 2000s when Nepal was in turmoil. The Maoist conflict had been raging for a decade. Cities and villages were heavily militarized. Thousands were dead and many more were displaced. On the other side, the monarchy was tightening its grip. In February 2005, King Gyanendra staged a coup d'etat, seizing absolute control of the country and moving to suppress both the Maoists and the parliamentary parties by force. However, history often takes unexpected turns. Out of this darkness emerged a political alliance, the Maoists who had taken up arms and the mainstream political parties sidelined by the king came together. In November 2005, in New Delhi, they signed the 12-point understanding, a document that became the foundation of Nepal's peace process. Within months, millions of Nepalese took to the streets in what we now remember as Jana Andolan II, or the Second People's Movement. Ultimately, the king was forced to step down, and Nepal was transformed from a Hindu kingdom into a secular federal democratic republic. Now here is where India enters the picture. India hosted the talks that produced the 12-point understanding, but its involvement was neither public nor official. It did not have the status of a mediator. Many Nepalese still wonder, was India a genuine facilitator of peace or simply pursuing its own strategic goals? My research revolves around these very questions. To understand these issues, I conducted 18 key informant interviews, collected over 100 media articles, and analyzed numerous speeches, videos, and archival materials. Many of my informants were not just observers, but participants in the peace process. political leaders who negotiated agreements, who sat at the negotiating table in New Delhi, and later drafted Nepal's new constitution. I approached the research through a critical realist lens, which helped me look beyond surface events to the deeper mechanisms shaping Nepal's transition. Theoretically, I draw on a three-layer framework combining peace and mediation studies, critical international relations, and global development studies, linking Nepal's peace process with broader questions of power and inequality. What I found is a story of contradictions. On one hand, India's assistance was indeed helpful. Without its support, the 12-point understanding might not have been signed so quickly. On the other hand, India used this narrative of being the peace broker to justify its deeper involvement in Nepal's internal politics for years to come. As I saw in my thesis, the push for peace was not born in New Delhi. It was a homegrown initiative formed in the villages of Western Nepal, in secret meetings between Nepali leaders who had realized that they had more to gain by uniting against the king than by fighting each other. They had recognized what mediation scholars call a mutually enticing opportunity, a golden chance to reshape the nation if only they could join hands. Anyway, the 12-point understanding was signed in India, and there is no doubt that India's role was supportive. India provided a safe space, arranged the logistics, and extended its goodwill and moral support. So after all, was India a good neighbor, a friendly helper? Well, yes and no, because once the door was opened, India didn't just drop by for a quick goodwill visit. It moved into the living room, sat in the best chair, and started commenting on the furniture. While offering assistance, it also asserted its will, it mediated, it meddled, and it micromanaged Nepal's internal affairs for years. During the long post-conflict transition, India was everywhere, in party negotiations, in government coalitions, even in day-to-day political decisions. During that period, major political decisions in Nepal increasingly required India's approval. Government formations, constitutional provisions, security appointments, and even district-level administrative positions became subject to Indian veto power. It employed a mix of soft power, including development aid, cultural grants, and scholarships, and hard power, such as coercive diplomacy and economic blockade to achieve its goal. India's excessive involvement in post-conflict Nepal created what I call peace dependency. Nepal's political actors became so reliant on India to resolve every political stalemate that the very facilitator of peace became a source of political paralysis, undermining the national sovereignty it claimed to support. But why did India act this way? To answer this question, my research had to look beyond Nepal and place India-Nepal relations within a bigger global picture. India is often described as a rising power. Many once hoped that such powers from the global south would take the lead in building a fairer and more equitable world. Yet, this has not been the case. As I explained in my thesis, the so-called rising powers of the global south have engaged in reproducing old patterns of domination on a regional scale. There has been a tendency to describe India's involvement in Nepal either through the lens of expansionism or by framing Nepal as a small state. But I offer a different angle. I locate it within the broader structure of global capitalism and imperial hierarchy and argue that India's actions in post-conflict Nepal are best understood through what Roy Marini described already in the 1970s as sub-imperialism. To put it simply, India is not a core imperial power like the USA, but it executes imperial functions within its regional sphere while remaining subordinate to global capital. My research highlights how strategic and sub-imperialist motives shaped India's engagement in post-conflict Nepal. Historically, India has trapped Nepal in a wave of dependencies. It has sought to guarantee its access to Nepal's natural resources, reduce Nepal to a submissive client state, and counter China's growing yet equally assertive influence in the region. This process only intensified during the post-conflict years. Whether through FDI or exports, Indian companies dominate Nepal's economy. They are engaged in resource extraction and market capture. They extract raw materials, exploit cheap labor, seize domestic markets, and repatriate profits to metropolitan centers. As many as 8 million Nepalese work in Indian cities under dire conditions as security guards, taxi drivers, domestic workers, and construction laborers. More than 30,000 Nepali men serve in the Indian army, fighting lethal wars and protecting India's borders and territorial integrity. This may sound like labor migration, but it is not. It is the creation of an underclass serving Indian capital accumulation and sub-imperialism. Interestingly, India's relationship with Nepal mirrors its own interactions with global powers. While India micromanages Nepal, it remains heavily dependent on the USA for security and defense, on global financial institutions for development finance, and on Western markets for economic growth. As many as 1 million Indians work in IT and call center jobs for more than 1,000 American firms, supplying cheap labor to the core. Moreover, despite projecting itself as a rising power, India is firmly embedded within the US-led Indo-Pacific strategy. All this creates a cascading system of exploitation and dependency. The USA and other core powers extract surplus value from India through trade relationships, debt structures, and investment patterns that favor metropolitan capital. India, in turn, reproduces these extractive relationships with smaller neighbors like Nepal. This isn't coincidental. This is structural. Sub-imperialist powers function as transmission belts for core imperial interests while developing their own exploitative relationships with weaker neighbors. Indian policy toward Nepal is consistently framed in terms of democracy promotion, neighborhood first approach, regional stability, or even South-South cooperation. This portrayal of India as a rising power helps justify and legitimize its behavior. India presents itself as a leader of the global South, an alternative to Western imperialism, a champion of developing world interests. This rhetoric obscures the reality that India's foreign policy increasingly serves the same extractive logic as traditional imperial powers. India may not be a global superpower yet, but in South Asia, it already acts like one. India is the peace broker, the democratic ally, the development partner, and the regional leader representing the global South interests. These aren't accidental characterizations. They are carefully constructed identity categories designed to obscure extractive relationships and imperial functions. Countries like India, Brazil, China, and South Africa were supposed to herald a more equitable world order, representing the aspirations of the global South for justice and solidarity. They were supposed to lead the creation of a new international economic order. Instead, many have become regional hegemons, reproducing the very power structures they claim to oppose. They pursue capital accumulation, resource extraction, and market expansion that reinforce existing power structures. They favor extractive high carbon growth and market policies over social welfare or wealth redistribution. And they have been accused of suppressing social movements and practicing different forms of internal colonialism. These issues have profound implications for the future of international relations. Instead of a multipolar world characterized by greater equality and cooperation, we are seeing the emergence of multiple imperial subsystems, each dominated by regional hegemons serving broader imperial objectives. These questions are not merely academic. They go to the heart of how smaller countries or marginalized populations within the so-called rising powers experience peace, democracy, and sovereignty. So let me return to the question of peace again. Although it is not the main focus of my study, my analysis revealed important lessons from Nepal's peace process, lessons that may serve practitioners and policymakers well. So what can we learn from Nepal's peace process? First, peace is never only about ending violence. It must also mean justice, inclusion, and transformation. Nepal succeeded in stopping the war, integrating the armies, and writing a constitution, yet transitional justice remained unfinished. And the socio-economic reforms promised at the dawn of the peace process never truly materialized. Nepal shows us that peace without justice is no peace at all. It is only a pause before the next conflict. As the recent Gen Z uprising of young Nepalese demonstrated, peace is not simply the absence of war. It must also embody justice, dignity, and opportunity. Without these, the potential for turmoil will always remain. Second, external actors are double-edged sword. Their support can be helpful, but they do have their own agendas. Mediation is not just a neutral tool, it can also be a foreign policy instrument, a way of extending influence, or as was the case here, consolidating sub-imperialism. Third, Nepal has shown that even in the shadow of a giant, collective resilience and defiance remain possible. Ladies and gentlemen, why does this matter beyond Nepal? Because we live in a world where conflicts are increasingly mediated by regional powers, not just global institutions. From Africa to Asia, rising powers are stepping in as mediators and peace builders, but their motives are often questionable. Nepal's story may sound like a story of sorrow and victimhood, but it is not. I want to emphasize that Nepal is also a powerful story of resilience and resistance. Despite the dependency, despite the immense power imbalance, Nepal has repeatedly and courageously pushed back. When India pressured Nepali leaders to compromise on the new constitution in 2015, they refused and promulgated it anyway. When India imposed an economic blockade, the Nepali people responded not with submission, but with a surge of national unity and defiance. Nepal has since worked on diversifying its foreign relations and reached out to other countries for cooperation. So I do not stand here today in despair. No, I stand here in hope. For Nepal, despite all its trials, remains a republic. It remains a democracy, and it remains resilient. That resilience itself is a powerful message. The people have shown that even in the shadow of giants, the spirit of freedom can rise. In the end, my research is not simply a critique of India's involvement. It is a call to think critically about power, about mediation, about South-South relations, and about the elephant in the room, global corporate capitalism. Capitalism operates not just as an economic system, but as a silent architect of international relations. It can exert influence in places where we least expect it, even in areas like conflict mediation. These questions matter not just for Nepal and India, but for all of us striving to build a fairer world. I hope this research contributes to these vital conversations and helps us imagine and perhaps even create a better world together. Thank you. Honored opponent, Professor Francesco Strazari, I now call upon you to present your critical comments on my thesis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me a chance to come and offer my view about this piece of work, which, as you have seen, is rather articulated and goes in depth into a process of research that lasted a few years and focused on a much broader span of time. We're talking today about a dissertation that, in my view, is a robust contribution to the fields of international relations, peace studies, and to our understanding of South Asian geopolitics. It's a dissertation that we can see as a remarkable scholarly achievement in that it's methodologically rigorous, it's theoretically articulated, at times sophisticated, and let me stress that politically courageous. It offers a novel lens in a number of ways on India-Nepal relations and makes a valuable contribution to our debates on mediation, on rising powers, on problems with democratic backsliding in post-conflict setting, and on South-South dynamics. I guess with some little refinement, maybe on questions of conceptual precision or regional contextualization, this could form the basis for a landmark monograph on this field. Let me also say a couple of things about the research process that shines through the work. This is a thesis that is grounded in critical realism, and it is designed to explore through multi-source data India's role in Nepal peace process and the political transition between 2005 and 2017, as we have seen. I particularly appreciate the empirical richness and the reflexivity that permeates this piece of work. And the adoption of a theoretically pluralist framework, which is conducive at the end in a solid descriptive and analytical piece, offering us as a contribution the concept of peace dependency, upon which we will have a chance to discuss today. Shall we go into more depth now? Shall we sit maybe and yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Honorable.
Okay.